and we're wondering if it is a helpful thing to look more deeply into the practice of astrology to get more of an idea of the patterns and the rhythms, the opportunities and the lack of opportunities. To the entity which feels positively or affirmatively concerning keeping up with the chart's progression for the self, astrology can become that aid in consciousness which creates for the seeker a vantage point in consciousness which can act as a collecting area for the amassing of one's psychic self. Welcome to the Reality Revolution. I am your host, Brian Scott. Today we're going to go over some different channelings from the Quo material that deals specifically with astrology. I have not dealt with astrology a lot on the podcast. You can find some different conversations in the Neville Goddard lecture, The Pearl with Great Price, as well as the reality transurfing episode on the mirror makers. My own opinion is obviously there's some truth, and astrology can be incredibly powerful in helping to understand your own archetypes. There is a map that astrology gives us. If you see a mountain in front of you, obviously you need to go around it. So we're dealing with something very powerful and real. But a lot of times people will take the information from astrology and give it their power. You are all powerful. You can overcome anything in astrology. Mercury in retrograde is irrelevant. Nothing is important. Nothing can stop you. You have the power. And some people that become super reliant on astrology give their power away, saying, I don't have the power to create my reality. Saturn does. So I wanted to get what perspective Quo had on astrology to see if they had a perspective on it. They talk about archetypes in the episode on the tarot. You can see what Ra had to say about the tarot. If you want to know more about Quo and Ra and who they are, check out my previous episodes for more of an introduction. Quo is a principle of entities that are channeled through Carla Ruckert, Jim McCarty, and LL Research, and they deal with a variety of conversations. Super fascinating material. I have lots of different episodes. We've gone over some of the information they've taught. I find that it resonates with me and it's very authentic and powerful. We begin with a channeling given in November of 1991. This Sunday's meditation has to do with the practice of astrology. And we're wondering if it is a helpful thing to look more deeply into the practice of astrology to get more of an idea of the patterns and the rhythms, the opportunities and the lack of opportunities that present themselves on our path, or if it's just as well to content ourselves with the passing knowledge of astrology. In other words, do you think astrology can be used in the seeker's daily life, and if so, how? Carla Channeling says, we are those of Quo, greetings in the love and in the light of the one infinite creator. It is a privilege and a blessing to be joining in your circle of seeking this day. And we wish to thank each of you who has called us for the purpose of transmitting information, for by so doing, each has enabled us to perform that service which we seek at this time to do. We are most happy to share our thoughts on astrology with the disclaimer that our thoughts are to be heard as the thoughts of a friend rather than those of an all-wise teacher, for we make errors. The request we have of you is that you simply leave behind any thought which does not seem worthwhile to you. We give this instrument the picture of the world that lies in a darkness, a kind of waiting or anticipatory darkness such as the eye of a great holiday. The present period among those upon your sphere's surface at this time is an increasingly exciting one, as there has been more and more of that consciousness among all of your world's peoples that some great event seems to be in the offing, so that the coming of the night is more acceptable. It is into such a frame of consciousness, if you will, that we bring the discussion of astrology. This instrument wonders what we do, but we ask it to relax and go with us on this. There have been centuries in which it would not have aided most to look more closely into the archetypal mind. These centuries have passed. For this third density experience which you enjoy at this time, the end truly is near, if you will, not physically, but more and more mentally and spiritually. There is that subconscious or unconscious amongst your peoples, that there are special reasons to look more deeply into the natural phenomena and their possible effect upon the self, be it body, mind, or spirit that is affected. Astrology offers one way of learning more about the deeper mind, or what we have called the archetypical mind. It is a complex and detail-driven technology, if you will, the system of ephemeral mathematical constructs having to do with configurations of heavenly bodies. To the student who wishes to probe more deeply within the self, to become more and more familiar with those uncharted regions of the self represented by the marker in consciousness, which you could call sub-awareness. There is this sub-awareness that the deeper studies at this crux may be those which have fruitful results. On this level, let us say, the awareness of specific and personal detail is not that which we speak at this time, but rather the archetypical mind finds explication by the relationships of heavenly bodies to each other and to this planetary sphere upon which you presently enjoy incarnation. At this level, much deep awareness can be encouraged by immersion in that complex set of relationships of star to star, and star to the system of star and planets, which you call home. On another level, the personal level, the yield of useful information from continued study of and awareness of the progression of one's own, this instrument would use the word chart, is, shall we say, a good way to develop both an instinct for inference and a relatively authentic feeling of control over the continuing life experience which is so precious to you. To one entity, such a study would be work, a difficult chore done in order for the learning. To such a one, we would suggest investigating other avenues for becoming more attuned to the environment and for aiding in the feeling of control over the life experience. Astrology, then, is that for which some entities are well suited, others not. To the entity which feels positively or affirmatively concerning keeping up with the chart's progression for the self, astrology can become that aid in consciousness which creates for the seeker a vantage point in consciousness which can act as a collecting area for the amassing of one's psychic self. The gift of being psychic or aware in non-physical ways is within all persons. The means of developing this gift are tremendously large, infinite, we would think. However, to a fairly large percentage now seeking to increase the rate of learning, spiritually speaking, a substantial number would indeed find in astrology that place from which to continue to learn how to gather more and more different information from the environment. For the environment is illusory, and more than that is an illusion with many sub-illusions which further color the catalyst which is retained for use by your minds. Now let us speak more in general, for there is a point to be made as regards this use of systems created by the mind and observations of mankind. Insofar as the system is internally valid in its logic, that system may be to the entity which plumbs its depths that crutch or aid which acts as the collector for the abilities and gifts of the seeker. In general, it is well to choose a system, whether it be astrology or numerology, the study of the eye, or head or hand, and we could list systems for a substantial length of your time. What avails them to the seeker as efficient tools is that very systematic nature, for the mind within incarnation has the instinct for the pattern. Each entity in each experience is in part working internally to place the present moment into a context which will yield the maximum amount of information. This information is usually heavily biased toward comfort and well-being. However, the mind can be increasingly trained to retain catalyst which is presented to the mind, which perhaps has little, if any, survival use, but which does indeed aid in spiritual learning. And the way to become more able to do this work in consciousness is to persist in experiencing and studying one system, be it of myth, science, philosophy, or ethics, or any system whatsoever, which we correct this instrument, to which the seeker is personally and individually drawn. For you are indeed living on the eve of that which shall come to be. It is almost impossible to describe the nature of the shift of consciousness, from basic third density to basic fourth density. This shift shall take you with it. If you dwell on the planet Earth, therefore we encourage the twin awareness that is a good time to be watchful and that it is a good time to celebrate. That which astrology or any ology might do is aid in development of that sharply tuned hunger for the truth revealed within the present moment. How do we encourage each to more and more dwell and marinate the complete entity in that present moment? It may seem odd that the mind structure is such that the entrance to the present moment is often roundabout, moving not through the invisible door into the fully accepted present, but rather going completely around the entire structure of living to surprise the present moment only after the long walk has sharpened the appetite. Astrology is, shall we say, the hors d'oeuvre, which encourages an entity to more aptly fit the intellect to accept an increasing number of inferences. This ability to loosen the self from the physical and move into an abstract system of gazing at the self is key. What you do in gazing at astrology is to sharpen the intellect's ability to let go enough so that the gifts which are called psychic may express themselves intelligibly to that mind, which has been softened to accept increasing numbers of inferences. For that which you seek cannot be deduced or reasoned. Discuss what you will, you cannot bring instrumentation, as you now know, to bear on the nature, the power, and the position of the word or logos, which is the original thought of the one infinite creator. We would at this time declare with regret that this is the substance of our discussion at this time, unless there is a query which would take this line of reasoning further. Moving to a channeling given on February 7th of 2006. Question: Edgar Cayce said the most modern astrologers use the wrong zodiac and should be using one based on the Persian calendar. The use of the sidereal zodiac, which accounts for precession of the stars as espoused by Cyril Fagan and Donald Bradley, results in rotating the planets about 24 degrees clockwise in the horoscope chart, or 8/10 of a sign backwards when compared to the use of the tropical zodiac. For example, my sun sign is Pisces in the tropical zodiac, yet falls back into the sign of Aquarius in a horoscope based on the sidereal zodiac. I believe that my sun sign is Aquarius. I also believe that the use of the Fagan-Bradley sidereal zodiac is more accurate than that of the tropical zodiac to determine the placement of the planets, which also include our sun and moon in the signs and houses of a natal horoscope. Can you confirm this? Carla Channeling says, we are known to you as the principle of Quo. With regard to the query asked by the one known as E concerning the use of the sidereal astrology as opposed to tropical astrology, we cannot confirm the choice of one type of reading over another, and we would make a few comments about our inability to confirm this preference. It is our understanding, and we offer it humbly since we feel that it is only a rough approximation of the truth rather than the precise truth, that the use of both sidereal and tropical astrological charts is appropriate when studying the influences which make up the geography of an entity's interior landscape. There are two aspects to a density. One aspect is relatively fixed, one aspect is relatively unfixed. The masculine side of the study of astrology is that of the tropical astrological chart. It represents that which is fixed into the earth by the occasion of your birth into third density existence. There is another aspect which influences the use of astrology, and this is the feminine aspect of the density. In this density of astrology, the information is considerably helpful, but it does differ from the tropical chart in that it embraces more of the unfixed or soul-driven, if you will, aspects of personality. Therefore, if an entity is actively investigating his own soul aspects, it is quite likely that he will find sidereal astrology more helpful in describing the environment in which he finds himself in his inner work than if he uses the tropical astrological chart. Gazing at the differences between a sidereal and a tropical chart will give to an entity an interesting view of the various aspects of his own character. The sidereal aspects describe more the soul aspects of the entity, whereas the tropical chart describes more the personality or applied incarnational aspects of a personality. Looking at the difference between the two, gives to the student of his own personality an idea of the dynamics of the earthly self with respect to that self which entered incarnation and that self which shall remain after incarnation. Neither aspect is higher than the other aspect. We wish to make that clear. The two aspects are, as it were, the vertical aspect and the horizontal aspect of the cruciform nature of personality. There is that vertical aspect that touches down into the earth and holds into incarnation certain aspects of the personality, and there is that floating or horizontal aspect to the personality that is never completely nailed down by incarnation, but rests within the energy body as the deeper aspects that the soul has brought forward into incarnation at this time. Question: I believe that the planets in the sign of our natal horoscope are representative of the energies of our inner or hidden soul pattern. Can you confirm this? I also believe that the natal planets in the signs in a sidereal horoscope are comparable to the potentiators identified by Ra in Book 4. I believe that the planetary aspects with small, close orbs in our natal sidereal horoscope represent our lessons to be learned in this incarnation, and I believe the transiting planets, which aspect our natal planets, identify the functional energies that Ra called catalysts of our experiences and significators of our choice. Can you confirm my beliefs in the astrological relationships? Please offer any comments you may feel that are helpful. We are those of Quo and are aware of your query, my brother. We find that we cannot confirm the correspondences that you so carefully have put forward. We find them provocative and interesting. There is fruitful subject matter within these assumptions for much thought, and we encourage you to go forward with your observations and your attempts to find correspondences. We would, however, suggest that the attempt to wed astrological information and functions or aspects of the archetypes is doomed to failure if the attempt is made to bring correspondences forward on a one-to-one basis. The reason for this is that each entity is a unique expression of the infinite creator. Each relationship that an entity makes to an archetype is made often unconsciously and almost always without any firm intention of addressing an archetype. The situations that an entity enters are full of possibilities. And when an entity's response to those possibilities moves along a line that identifies feeling or emotion and allows that feeling or emotion to be filled with the information of love and light by whatever means such an entity chooses to use, that entry into the archetype becomes a thing in itself, or as this instrument calls, a ding en siècle. It is not dependent upon the personality or the situation of an entity, but rather it is dependent upon the choice and the attitudes of a moment. For an entity to move as often as possible into archetypal work, it is well for that entity to observe carefully thoughts and their attendant emotions and feelings. When thoughts contain passion, will, emotion, or feeling, and we are vague about this carriage of energy because the color of thought is a very complex subject, then it becomes a candidate for helping a spirit who is seeking to move deeper into knowing itself to do so. Without this carrying of color, feeling, or emotion, the thought remains interesting and valuable on an intellectual level, but it does not become fixed into a vehicle that will move the entire seeking spirit deeper into its own experience of itself. Consequently, although there is much interest and much potential within this question and the pursuit of it by the one known as E, we would suggest that the initial correspondences are simplistic. We would also suggest in this regard that if one known as E expands the kinds of information that he moves into this correspondence list, he may find interest in several different avenues of expression. The one that we would suggest that this entity examine further is that seemingly disparate correspondence set of organs of the body in the various planets. It may well be that as more details are compounded in this correspondence list, there will come to the one known as E a subtle and interesting pattern that creates for this entity a more satisfying overall set of correspondences than this entity has yet discovered. Question: I believe that the positions of the moon's north and south nodes in a sidereal natal chart identify the energies that express the dharma and karma, respectively, that are to be experienced and possibly balanced in our lives. Can you confirm this? Please offer any comments that you feel may be helpful. We are those of Quo and are again, my brother, aware of your query and at the same time unable to confirm your initial conjecture. Again, we would suggest that you be very patient with gazing at and sensing into the kinds of correspondences that you may find. The road that you are on in this query we may say is encouraging, and we believe that you will find quicker bounty in working with this correspondence than you will find in your previous query. However, because of the complexity of the soul involved, it is impossible to identify the sidereal aspects as the only aspects that move into helpful information or resources, what you have called dharma and karma. We would further suggest that once you have uncovered and identified that which is your settled opinion, it is helpful to release such information and conjecture from becoming completely literal. It is helpful at all times to remember that astrology is partly science and partly art. It is partly an examination of the mathematical relationships and the structure that those mathematical relationships build when one decides that the center of the universe is the self. Question: I'm preparing an archetypes in astrology presentation that I believe may be comparable to the use of the tarot's major arcana cards for archetypical study, as outlined in Book 4 of the Law of One. How may I improve the presentation to reach others interested in studying techniques for spiritual growth and evolution using astrological archetypes? We are those of Quo and are aware of your query, my brother. We respond to your query indirectly, in a certain sense, in saying that we do not wish to discuss with you any of your concepts. However, you asked how you may improve your presentation, and we find that you are in a good position to increase the efficacy of your presentation because of the fact that you are very visual, as you have told this instrument, in the way that you see things and in your ability to create visual aids. Question: I believe there are correspondences in the energies of the planets and our chakras. For example, Saturn's energies correspond to the first chakra, Mars the second, Sun the third, Venus the fourth, Mercury the fifth, Moon the sixth, Jupiter the seventh. Can you confirm this? Please offer any comments. We are those of Quo and are aware of your query, my brother. Again, we cannot confirm these correspondences. We would instead suggest that it may be helpful for you to examine each chakra in the sense of identifying the octave of energies that are available to that chakra. That is, in the red ray chakra, for instance, there is the red ray's relationship with itself. There is the red ray in its foreshadowing of orange. There is the red ray in its relationship to the yellow ray, the green ray, the blue ray, and the indigo ray. For each of those chakras, 1 through 6, there is an entire octave of correspondences that may be used to consider the more subtle aspects of work within one chakra. Any of those chakras mentioned, that is the first 6 chakras, not counting the 7th, may have overactivation, underactivation, or blockage, and that blockage may be simple or complex. It may involve one chakra, or it may have connections into 2 or 3 chakras. For the most simple work, it is enough to think of chakra and its basic attributes or the material with which it is associated. For more subtle work, when the initial blockages and so forth have been examined, and yet the entity still feels there is more examination that would be helpful because of some set of feelings, analysis, or reasoning in the process of attempting to see the self and to help the self evolve, then it may well be helpful to do the more subtle work and see what some of these more subtle relationships feel like. Sometimes there's a situation where 2 chakras at once are caught in a dynamic that is hard to see. It is very helpful if you will take the time, perhaps at the end of each day, to sit down with the self and move through the thoughts and feelings of the day. When you can identify a particular feeling that you wish to investigate, ask yourself if it reminds you of more than one center of activity. Perhaps it is a relationship between a question of survival and a question of ethics that move into either personal dynamics between the self and another self, or legal or family dynamics in the relationship with a family member. This is a simple example. The ways that an entity can become caught in a dynamic between 2 chakras or even 3 are almost infinite, and no entities can do work the same way. Not only because each entity is different, but because the experiences that impinge upon each entity are unique. Our final comment to you, my brother, is not to be discouraged by our many negative responses to your questions on correspondences. You are on a good track of research and a better track in terms of the metaphysical attempt to enter into an understanding of dynamics, both in astrology and in the study of the archetypes that escape the bounds of reason and are found half as we said, in the science of the subject and half in the art. When you consider mythology with its many stories, and when you consider the storytelling nature of almost all representative art, music, and literature, you may easily see that the stories and their influence in terms of being parables or containing pointed morals or lessons is quite rich. You may find such considerations interesting and helpful. Yes, Cole, one final question. Am I correct in believing that the energies or vibrations of the sun, the moon, or planets do indeed affect a being on Earth? Could you comment on the energies that permeate the atmosphere? We are those of Quo and are happy to comment on this query, my brother. The energies of planets are very powerful in their drawing of certain geographies. They're like a street map or a road map of a person's inner landscape. The influences, both fixed and non-fixed, that affect an entity at the time of his birth, and certainly before the birth in terms of the unfixed energies, create the structure of ways which an entity may move to get from here to there. Now, if this instrument wished to go from Louisville to Chicago, she would look at the map and discover that there was a big interstate that connected those two towns. She might decide to go up Interstate 65 north from Louisville to Chicago. If she decided to go that way, the situation as regards repairs to the road and problems that were experienced on the road at the time that you were traveling to Chicago would impinge upon that journey. If this instrument decided that she did not wish to go directly to Chicago, she would find that her map extended all the way around the planet. She could choose to go to Europe and then to Asia and then move around to Siberia and Russia and Alaska, coming over into Canada and down into North America to reach Chicago. That is also a route, and it is interesting to look at an entity's information as regards astrology and so forth to make an educated guess as to whether an entity shall choose an interstate and a very direct route to a certain lesson, or whether an entity will choose a roundabout or an outrageously roundabout route that still eventually has the capacity to deliver one to the supposed location of one's desire. Perhaps it may be seen by this example that a great part of the use of astrology is in gazing at one's desires and looking at the use of one's will. What is the most efficacious and skillful way to set about choosing one's goals? And once those goals and ambitions have been set by the self and acknowledged as that about which the self feels passionately and which it wishes to pursue with all of its heart, all of its soul, all of its mind, and all of its strength, then it is interesting to ask, in the light of these pieces of information about the self, what are the most skillful ways to pursue such a goal? We would emphasize that the influences upon the self from the stars, planets, and other aspects of astrological charts are both clear and offered without the necessity to give up one's free will. One retains one's free will to a complete extent. One may choose to disregard one's planetary influences. In our humble opinion, it is well to cooperate with one's planetary influences. The choice that each entity entering incarnation made as to the moment of that birth, as well as the moment of conception and the moment of the entity's entrance into the fetus and or the infant, are interesting points to consider. They do not mean that your free will is limited. They indicate the strengths, weaknesses, and general topography of the inner landscape. It is always helpful to have a reasonably good idea of what one's strengths and limitations may be as an entity, as one gazes at the self, its goals and aims in life, and its heart, its desires, and its will. In this regard, it is well to know that built into astrology, built into archaeology, built into the study of the archetypes, indeed built into almost every way that one can examine the self, there is that combination of science and art, fact and myth, reason and inspiration. Allow these dynamics to play as your mind considers these relationships. We thank you, my brother. We would at this time leave this instrument and this group as we found you, in the love and in the light, the thought and the manifestation of the one infinite creator. We are known to you as Quo, Adonai, Adonai. As you can see from these channelings, there's definitely something there. We can get information from astrology. Quo is very reticent to be specific about this, and the journey in understanding the self is important. What Quo is saying is that it's important for you to explore those archetypes which appeal to you and this sort of information, but it is also sort of an art, and it's an internal process. There is no absolutes in the understandings of astrology. So if somebody says something absolutely, hey, Mercury's in retrograde right now and it's absolutely going to be a bad day for you, forget about it. Most of the stuff they're talking about is an understanding of self, not a prediction of your future. So there's ways that we can take this information, and most importantly, you have a choice over your planetary influence. You can disregard it. I don't think they outright say that it's not true. They're saying that it's true, and that the journey that the particular person asking questions about is a fruitful one, that if they explore it, they will come to a greater understanding of a variety of things. And that's the best way to deal with something like that. I find studying the archetypes and the tarot and astrology to be some of the more difficult things. If I study it in particular to understand myself, to understand questions that are of a spiritual nature, it's always fruitful for me. If I try to predict my future, if I asked, hey, should I take this business decision? Should I choose to be with that person? Then it's never as accurate. I don't use it as a predictor. I use it as a way of understanding. Everybody's different. So I say use it however resonates with you. But clearly, they're saying that you have a choice, that it's an art, that it's not an absolute. I still go back to the reality transurfing and the Neville Goddard stuff that says you create your reality. If I'm saying that something else is creating my reality, then I am losing some of my power. So I choose not to allow those planetary influences to affect me in my future in creating my reality. But I start to understand aspects of myself when I understand that there are archetypes that are universal in the way that my personality is constructed, in the way that I interact with others. And it brings out an understanding of these archetypes as to who I am. And that helps me to understand the world and the universe and my soul so much better. So I would like to get your comments on this and how you interact with astrological or tarot type of information. Do you let it predict your future? If somebody says to you, this bad thing's going to happen to you this week because Mercury is in retrograde and you're a Leo, how do you take that information? According to the transurfing information, just even hearing it will affect your subconscious mind. So I've reached a point where I don't even want to know if there's some sort of astrological projection for what may be happening on a global scale or personally. I don't want to know because it is subconscious. It immediately goes into my subconscious mind and I'm thinking about it even as a flash in my mind. Say you go to an astrologer and you ask, hey, should I have a romantic relationship with this person? And they say, oh no, you guys will not ever work out. Doesn't that hurt your chances almost immediately and automatically? You have to reprogram the information that you've been given because it's a powerful program. Somebody is saying the forces of the universe will work against you. So then in that moment, you either need to say, I don't believe this, or it's not true, it's not 100%, or you say it's going to be true and I'm not going to date this person, right? I'd rather not know. It is my choice whether or not that is going to be a good relationship or not. Everybody's different. I would like to get your perspective on this, especially when it comes to reality creation. In any case, you can find all episodes of The Reality Revolution at therealityrevolution.com. And welcome to The Reality Revolution.